The Armored Motor Services of America truck was taking $11 million in unmarked cash to the Federal Reserve Bank in Buffalo when its crew pulled over to buy coffee and donuts at a convenience store in the Rochester suburb of Henrietta. The unsuspecting guards escorting the cash had no idea what was about to hit them. Or did they? Welcome back to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. I'm your host, Philip Tomaso. Oh man, welcome back to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. Today is Monday, May 15th, 2023, and you know what that means. That means new episodes every Monday. May 15th, 2023 is no exception. Today we're talking about what I call episode 13, Inside Job, Armored Truck Robbery. I'm glad you're here. I hope you're enjoying the show, and I hope you will tell your friends about What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. We've got some great upcoming episodes for the rest of our season number 1, but today is episode 13, Inside Job, Armored Truck Robbery. So if you know me, you know I am a movie buff. My Facebook and Instagram pages are littered with brief reviews of the movies and TV shows I'm watching and what I think of them. Sometimes I even drop a full review on IMDb, the independent movie database, especially if my view of the film or show is completely at odds with what other reviewers are saying. The thing is, I can generally find the good in any production, even cheesy B horror films, which I tend to love. Generally, they make fun of me at work because of that fact. However, finding the good and giving something a great rating are clearly two different things. The point being, for this episode, we're going to look at an armored truck heist that happened here in Rochester. While I was doing my research for the show, I found myself making a list of the movies I needed to watch again. Armored truck heist movies. Now, when I do think of armored truck heist movies, a few jump immediately right to the forefront. And while this tangent has literally nothing to do with the podcast, I'm going to rattle off my 3 top films. So after listening to the podcast, and maybe you go back and watch the movies, same as I will be doing. So that's what we're going to do. My number 1, I'm going in number 1 to number 3 order. Now, my number 1 is Heat. I can't help but go to this masterpiece first. Al Pacino, Robert De Niro, Ashley Judd, Jon Voight. It's a thrilling and intense movie. I hope you check it out. My second favorite armored truck heist movie is Empire State. Also an edgy thriller with The Rock. You got Liam Hemsworth and Emma Roberts. I can't help but like movies with The Rock. I mean, the movies he makes, I enjoy them. You can call me crazy, but I do enjoy his movies. I'm not a fan of his wrestling. I'm also not a fan of wrestling. But his movies tend to have what I want in a film. I haven't really seen a bad one of his yet. And Empire State is far from bad. It's no Heat. Don't get confused on that. Heat is by far number 1. But it's also well worth the watch. And my third favorite, which is just a nonstop, tension-filled crime movie, is Wrath of Man with Jason Statham. I don't feel like I need to add anything to that. Wrath of Man, Jason Statham, great film, great. Top 3, Heat, Empire State, Wrath of Man. And now that I hopefully wet your armored truck heist robbery whistle, let's dive into episode 13. What do you say? So although the temperatures would get into the high 70s and low 80s at around 7 p.m. on Tuesday, June 26, 1990. How funny. 1990. So I was just turning 30 years old. I was born on June 3rd. So June 26, 1990, I'm just turning 30. It was mildly cool and only 58 degrees. Carrying $11 million in unmarked bills, an armored truck was on its way to make a delivery in Rochester, New York. It was on its way to Buffalo, but it stops in Rochester, New York. So I know if you regularly listen to the show, you're well aware that, at least for the first season of What Were They Thinking, I'm focusing all of my episodes on Rochester related crimes. And I tend to say this in every episode because I don't want people to feel like he only covers things in Rochester. Yes, I know, I'm aware. But I'm focusing all of my episodes on Rochester related crimes, okay? This one's no different. And just for a quick geographical guide, Rochester sits directly between, or mostly directly between, Buffalo, which everyone has heard of. Buffalo, right? You got the Buffalo Bills. Maybe that's why they've all heard of Buffalo. Everyone's heard of Buffalo. And Syracuse, which also everyone seems to have heard of. Rochester tends to be a little unknown city sandwiched between the two. Unfortunately, we have a ton of crime. But fortunately, that makes my podcast all the more relevant. So, on the way to make this delivery, the armored truck made an unauthorized stop. Apparently, the two inside the truck did this routinely. And I'm thinking that goes against the armored truck policies, but they did it. They pulled into a convenience store in Henrietta, a more southern town inside of Monroe County. There's no dispute that the driver of the armored truck was Albert Ranieri. What I cannot seem to find anywhere is who his partner actually was, other than it was a female. And in a few media outlets, I came across, they say something like, and we will call the other guard Mary Wilson. For some reason, the woman riding with Albert Ranieri is never identified. I can't find anything. And I looked. I mean, I Googled the hell out of Google. Okay. I went down some rabbit holes on Google to find out who this woman was who was riding shotgun with Albert Ranieri, and I came across nothing. I couldn't find anything to give me a name other than Mary Wilson. Why Mary Wilson? I have absolutely no clue. No clue. No cue. No clue. But for consistency's sake, I'm going to refer to her as Mary Wilson. Okay? So just to keep, so in case you do your own Google research after you listen to this episode, we're all on the same page. So while Albert is waiting inside the truck in the parking lot at this convenience store in Henrietta, Mary went into the store to pick up some snackable items, coffee, donuts, typical early morning necessities, right? You're on a road trip. You figure Buffalo's about 63 miles away from Rochester. You're going to need some coffee. You're definitely going to need some donuts. Mary Wilson is quoted, which is funny because we don't know what her name is, but she's quoted as having said, "We stopped there about once or twice a week and usually got about the same thing. And that morning, there was no one in there when I walked in. It was just me. And then eventually a lady came in later on. It was very normal." This is what she's saying about while she's inside the convenience store. So while Mary Wilson is inside the store filling coffee cups and selecting donuts for the rest of the drive, she's unaware that outside in the parking lot, things have gone sideways for Albert. A person in a Halloween mask managed to sneak up on Albert. The masked bandit put a gun to Albert's head, though a small break in the through a small break in the porthole glass. Okay, so there's this break in the glass. This masked gunman puts his gun through the hole, and Albert was ordered to keep both of his hands on the steering wheel and keep his eyes forward, looking straight ahead. A second masked person somehow managed to open the side door of the truck and climbed into the vehicle. Okay. Mary couldn't have been inside the store for very long, but it was long enough because when she returned and climbed into the passenger side of the armored truck, she did not immediately realize the truck had been commandeered by these criminals. Mary had stated she didn't have time to be scared because everything happened so fast. She was pushed to the floor inside the truck, and her wrists were bound together behind her back, her legs secured at the ankles with plastic cuffs. At the time, I was thinking zip ties, right? plastic cuffs makes you think zip ties, but there were some kind of plastic cuffs, not zip ties. Captain Neil Flood with the Monroe County Sheriff's Office said that Albert was forced to drive the armored truck at gunpoint. They had Albert travel almost 2 miles away from the convenience store to a secluded location in Henrietta. The entire time, a nondescript gray van followed closely behind them. The captain said, one couldn't have picked a better location. It was about 75 to 100 yards off the road, and it completely disappears from sight behind a small hill. And we know that the site had been prepared prior to the robbery. There's several tree branches that had been freshly cut to make sure that this large vehicle would fit. Okay, so this is a planned, which is obvious, right? Nobody robs an armored truck willy-nilly, right? Nobody just says, hey, you know what we should do? There's an armored truck in the convenience store. Let's go hit it. No, it's planned. So the captain of the Monroe County Sheriff's is just confirming that. And when he says by would fit, I'm thinking he means they could hide the armored truck once they finished removing the $11 million in unmarked cash from the vehicle. Police are pretty certain there was a third accomplice and that this third person was already at the secluded area waiting for the armored truck to arrive. Once at this, out of the way area, the robbers forced Albert to climb through the window separating the front from the back of the truck. He was then forced onto the floor in back, and his wrists and ankles were then bound together with those plastic cuffs, and they put him on top of his partner, Mary. Mary said the criminals barely talked. They used bolt cutters on a lock to get into the back of the vehicle, and then they moved quickly as they transferred the money from the armored truck into their gray van. The money was estimated to weigh, get this, the money was estimated to weigh roughly 2,000 pounds or 1 ton. That's 1 ton. Once the laborious task of the transfer was complete, they drove away. They left the two security guards bound together in the vehicle. They had their money and they were gone. Mary said, I sat there quietly, making sure I didn't hear any more voices. I was scared for my life. I kept thinking about my son, and I just thought I was going to die. That's why I broke loose, because I wasn't going to sit there and wait for somebody to come back and kill me. Can you imagine the fear of that? You don't know what's going on. You come out of the store, you got your glazed and your chocolate donuts, maybe a Boston cream-filled donut. You got your coffee. It's fresh. It's hot. You're looking forward to this peaceful, 45-minute drive to Buffalo. And then you're assaulted. You're bound and you're being robbed at gunpoint. Terrifying. So she says, the last thing she wanted to do, because she figured they're going to come back, is wait. And I don't blame her, but sometimes kicking into that higher gear, that fight or flight rationale is not as easy as one would think. And apparently for her, getting loose wasn't as easy as it sounded. She spent over 15 minutes struggling with the restraints, and once free, she couldn't get the plastic cuffs off of her partner. Okay, that's how I know these weren't zip ties. These are plastic cuffs, and they're not easy to just break or cut or get through. I'm sure she was both frantic and panicked. However, it sounds as if Mary had a pretty good head on her shoulders. She decided to get into the driver's seat at that point, and then she wanted to get the two of them as far away from the deserted location as possible. So she drove the armored truck to headquarters, which was located at 65 Vantage Point Drive. That's the address of the headquarters, I believe. And then from there, she reported the robbery. Vantage Point Drive is about, 15, 20-minute drive from Henrietta, just using a generic Henrietta address to Vantage Point Drive. About 15 to 20 minutes, considering morning traffic. So her deciding to head back to base to report the robbery is not unrealistic. Rather than try and signal for help where they were or go somewhere closer. I'm no armored truck expert, but I would have thought. Now, remember, this is 1990, okay? And while cell phones did exist and were starting to become quite popular, they still weren't all that common. They weren't as much of a necessity as we have them now today. We use them for every little thing. Um, it was actually 1985. Yeah, actually, 1985 was the first cell phone, uh, and it came with that giant battery pack. They called them car phones. That's what they were called back then. In 1985, they had that almost like briefcase battery pack that you would put in your car. The cell phone was actually connected to it with a cord, which I know a lot of people cord, but we used to have house phones with cords. Same idea. So 5 years later, cell phones hadn't caught on as much. They caught on, but not as much. They were a little bit more or a little bit less cumbersome at that point. The point is, I would have suspected armored trucks had radios, CBs or walkie talkies of some sort. And I can't imagine trucks out there with absolutely no communication abilities, even for way back in the 1990s. It makes it sound ancient, I know, doesn't it? To millennials, I am sure it is. For me, feels more like I don't know, feels like just a couple of years ago instead of over 3 decades. But perhaps there was a CB or some form of communication, and I am assuming if there was that the people holding up the vehicle disabled or destroyed or removed that communication capability. That's my guess. Nowhere can I find that that was done, but I'm going to assume if they had them, that is what was done. That's me guessing. So, regardless, okay, we'll get back to the case. Regardless, the thieves got away with roughly $11 million in unmarked money. The next day, when the nondescript gray van was discovered, when they found it, there was about $13,000 in loose bills recovered. Probably got loose during yet a second transfer of the money from the gray van into some other vehicle. Like it got loose and blew around, but it totaled around 13,000. At this time in 1990, the $11 million jackpot was considered one of the largest on the road armored truck heists in U.S. history. Hello, Rochester. we we break so many we break so many things. We break so many. I can't think of the word. Records. We break so many records, but they're all for the wrong reason. Usually it's snowfall. We get the most snowfall. Rochester, Syracuse, and Buffalo compete for who gets the most snowfall in a winter season. Anyway, so this is the biggest armored car on the road heist in U.S. history. And I believe if we go look back, but looking forward from this one, in 1997, the Dunbar armored car robbery topped the Rochester one when nearly $19 million, and this was in California, thank God, not in Rochester. That was in, was a heist on the road beat our record. Took 7 years for somebody to beat it, and California did it. It's funny because California and New York, two very similar dysfunctional states, in my opinion. Police also started working a theory. There was a substantial lack of physical evidence. However, they believed the convenience store carjacking of the armored truck was an inside job. The evidence seemed right there the entire time. There was a conveniently broken porthole. This was used by the first masked robber, where he was able to reach in and put a gun to Albert's head. Okay. The armored truck showed no signs of being tampered with, so the second robber must have had a key to gain access to the side door of the truck. We're talking about a suspiciously broken porthole and access to the side door on the armored truck. Additionally, the gunmen, aside from the masks, wore clothing identical to the uniforms worn by the Armored Motor Services of America guards. So they had uniforms. which, you know, in and of itself, that if I was going to try and do something like this, I would want to look as if I belonged as well. Um, so it's one thing. Add to that the fact only a few would have known there was a record 11 million unmarked dollars in cash being transported that day, and maybe only a few aware that the team made unscheduled stops at this particular convenience store in Henrietta, New York. There are reports from people or witnesses, really, who reported suspicious activity in the area around the time of the robbery. And from these witness accounts, police were able to composite sketch drawings of the potential thieves. One was seen the day before the robbery, lurking near the site where the truck was emptied and said to be in his mid to late 40s, about 5 feet 8 inches tall, and weighing roughly 180 pounds. The second suspect, the one thought to have been driving the van, was thought to be Puerto Rican or Italian, in his mid 30s or mid 40s, with dark hair and a mustache. And the third suspect, possibly spotted driving the same getaway van, was also in his mid 30s and between 5'10" and 6 feet tall, with dark hair and a mustache. And I do have a copy or an image of those drawn drawn pictures of the suspected suspects on the promo photo used for this episode. So you can get a look at what the composite drawings consisted of. It wasn't a lot, but it gave police something to go on, something to get started with. Although unresolved for years, police considered both Albert and Albert's father as prime suspects. Albert's father lived very close to where the money was transported out of the armored truck and into the van. In 1992, 2 years after the robbery, an informant confessed to the armed robbery and identified both Albert and his father, also named Albert, as fellow conspirators. They were then both arrested, charged with bank robbery, and their properties were searched. Oddly, Albert and his father were released since it was discovered the informant was incarcerated at the time of the armored truck heist in Henrietta. Okay? So the FBI was forced to drop the charges against Albert and his father, Albert. But in June 1995, the statute of limitations ran out anyway. If you don't know what that means, I'll explain it. Even if caught for the robbery after June 1995, the guilty party can't be tried or sent to prison. They're essentially free and clear of any wrongdoing. That's what the statute of limitations is. It's a set of limitations that when the time is up, they can no longer be charged or prosecuted for the crime committed, which is absolutely asinine. I don't know how statute of limitations can be so short. In New York, the statute of limitations for robbery is 5 years. So if you can rob someone and wait 5 years before you spend anything, you're golden. Does that even make sense? Doesn't matter if it makes sense. It's the law. It can't be found under timeliness of prosecution, or I'm sorry, I apologize. This can be found under timeliness of prosecutions, periods of limitation, criminal procedure, or the CPL. Chapter 11A, Adam, Part 1, Title C, Charlie, Article 30. All right. Chapter 11A, Part 1, Title C, Article 30. I have a link on the website if you want to read more on that, on our wonderful New York State laws that, as I've said before, favor the criminal. They favor the criminal and ostracize victims. That's how New York is. That's how California is. Both states. But our story doesn't end here, okay? We passed the statute of limitations, okay? But this would be an unsatisfying episode if that's where I ended this. And I'm not going to end it here because there's quite a bit more to this tale. So let's fast forward another 5 years to the year 2000. Albert, our guard who was driving the armored truck, not his father, okay? Albert and his former defense attorney, Anthony Leonardo Jr., went to a hotel room to purchase cocaine unaware the drug dealers were undercover FBI agents. During this drug deal, Albert couldn't keep his mouth shut. He started boasting to the undercover FBI agents about how he had literally burned $100,000 of stolen money from the armored truck heist in a barbecue pit to avoid getting caught and arrested. This man is bragging about taking 100K, throwing it into a barbecue pit, and burning it. 11 million minus 100K, not such a big deal for him. What a big deal to the rest of us, I'm assuming. He also spent 100 grand purchasing cocaine from these FBI agents. No arrests were made at that time because the FBI, keeping the two under surveillance, were in the process of putting together an ironclad case against them. Okay, so they're gathering evidence, and this drug deal, for whatever reason, wasn't enough to arrest them on the spot. The drug deal took place. I'm not understanding what the FBI's thinking was behind it. Have no fear, we're not done yet. Then on May 5th, 2000, Anthony Vaccaro, who was 44 years old and the owner of the nightclub Club Titanic, was shot and killed while driving his car. Now, I've been to this club, but not when it was known as Club Titanic. I can't remember what it was called back in 1990 or 1991 when I went there. This is down in Charlotte at the very northern end of the city on the west side. And it's right at the very end of Lake Avenue. Lake Ontario is maybe 350 yards north of the club, and the Genesee River is about another 250 yards east. Okay, it's a beautiful, but often at nighttime, shady part of the city. The place is always under new management. It's clearly one of these clubs that just has bad news attached to it, like an unchanged cat litter box. You know what I'm saying? That's for sure. I mean, it's too bad too because it's a great looking building. It's a 2-level club with a perfect outdoor venue for live music. That and the beach all around it. It's hard to beat. Unfortunately, it's something of a mess. And I don't, if we get into Rochester and Charlotte and the beach area, the gangs in the summer, the drugs, the carjackings, the family fights at picnics, it's not worth going down there sometimes. And it's literally 3 minutes away from my house. And I try to avoid it, especially after dusk. It's not worth it. It's too dangerous. Anyway, Club Titanic opened in 1999, but after the death of Vaccaro, it quickly went under. It would get opened again later by somebody else, but at this point in 1999, it quickly started going under. A few months later, both Albert and his former defense attorney, Leonardo, were arrested and charged with conspiring to distribute cocaine. Shocker, right? Shocker. You just bought $100,000 in cocaine from the FBI, and now what are you going to do? Well, you're going to try to move it. You're going to try and sell it. So Leonardo pleaded guilty to drug and conspiracy to commit murder charges, claiming he and Albert plotted the killing of Anthony Vaccaro. Come December 2002, we're 2 years after this all took place. Okay, nobody seems to be moving very fast to close or solve crimes. So now we're December 2002. Albert confessed to the armored truck robbery and Anthony Vaccaro's murder. Finally. Unbelievable. 12 years after the fact. 12 years after the fact for the robbery, and only a handful of years after the fact of the murder. He reportedly committed the murder because Leonardo convinced him Anthony was stealing from the restaurant Club Titanic. You see, if you ever watched Ozark on Netflix, you'll understand why Anthony stealing from his own club upset Leonardo and Albert. The two used the club for laundering their money. They were co-investors in the club. Okay, so money missing is deadly, obviously. So Albert also pleaded guilty to the charge of federal racketeering conspiracy in relation to the armored truck robbery. Albert told the judge he shot Vaccaro 8 times with a high-powered rifle from a passing car, an admission that drew gasps and sobs from the victim's widow. So her husband got killed, and he's saying, "Yeah, I shot him 8 times with a rifle while driving past him." Albert told the judge he shot Albert. I'm sorry. Albert admitted to the judge to gunning down Vaccaro 2 years prior, and that charge and the charge of conspiracy to commit murder were dismissed, which I don't get. Sometimes the plea deals made by the district attorney's office blow my mind. It's irritating. So Albert admitted to gunning down Vaccaro, and he admitted to this conspiracy to commit murder, and the judge allowed the district attorney's office, to make this deal with him where that wouldn't even be in play. So under his plea deal with prosecutors, the organized crime figure would get a 30-year sentence and a $250,000 fine. In 2020, Albert had the nerve to then ask for, and was thankfully denied, compassionate release. He will not be eligible for release until at least 2027, 4 years from now. I think that'll make him about 62 or 63 years old. Not old at all, and not right. This man is a soulless criminal. Under that plea deal with the prosecutors, a 30-year sentence for murdering someone, which doesn't play in, but we're going with the bank robbery and stuff like that. 30-year sentence doesn't make any sense. Leonardo, believe it or not, was released on parole back in 2013. The thing is, Albert Ranieri never named any accomplices in the armored truck heist. He was no snitch, no canary. He kept his mouth shut. Only 87,000 of the $11 million stolen was ever recovered. Albert said he spent more than 650,000 on drugs, stocks, and a limousine business. He also admitted paying someone $10,000 to apply for a job with the same armored truck company so he could coordinate another heist. But nothing ever came of it. But he admits it, and there's no doubt a lot of the money was laundered and will never be recovered. And I'm sure Albert's cohorts, the ones never identified, the ones never sent to prison, are living large with stolen money they can never be arrested for spending. And in just a couple of years, Albert's going to be free, and his cut of that pie will be waiting for him like hot apple pie with a nice scoop of vanilla ice cream to make it sweet for his release. I don't know. I'm kind of disgusted by our laws. I'm kind of disgusted by our judicial system when things like this can happen and people like Albert can get away with the shit they get away with. It doesn't make any sense. Not to me. Thank you for listening to What Were They Thinking True Crime Podcast. As always, like, share, subscribe, and we'll see you next time. New episodes every Monday.